We've got Ryan Wallen on here, covers Temple for Al's Daily and the 24/7 Sports Network. Miami and Temple are going to play this week. Miami 3-0, Temple 2-1. You know, this series kind of came about in 2017, a home and home series. It was going to be played first in Miami in 2020, but that game got canceled because of COVID. They're going to actually reschedule for 2029. So here we are. That's why Miami's playing at Temple, first time since '05. Ryan, let's get into it. You know, essentially with Temple, again, 2-1. Coming off the win. But what do you think Temple does best so far this year, or what do they essentially hope to do best?
Yeah, I think so far what you've seen from Temple is that they're kind of getting back to their roots of just playing, tough, hard-nosed football and they're finishing, with an edge. That's kind of what I've seen from this team, kind of got away from that under the previous regime and Rod Carey. And, you kind of saw guys starting to quit a little bit. And, it wasn't that Temple tough mindset that Matt Rule and Jeff Collins really carried with the program here. So, I think I've seen that coming back. The defense is kind of playing with a little bit of an edge. They're playing strong, tough, hard-nosed football. They're looking physical. They're looking tough. And, at the end of the day, Temple's going to try to beat you by controlling the clock and controlling the game. So hopefully they can get the run game going on Saturday, and we'll see how that plays out then on offense.
A couple of interesting things. Yeah, Coach Cristobal played against Temple as a player, coached against them, and he was asked about it this week about Temple, and that was exactly what he said. Hard, tough-nosed team. Familiar with them obviously from his days at Rutgers as well. Ryan, you touched on the run game, and I'm interested in that in particular, given Coach Drayton's past, the running game in general. Just where do you think it is? And obviously the big numbers against Norfolk State last game, but obviously the opponent. But just I'm curious where you think the run offense is right now, and maybe with where Drayton would like it to be.
Yeah, I think if you asked me this question before Saturday, I would have had a very different answer. Coach Drayton has said, it's just not performed up to where he wanted it to be. And it frankly hasn't been like that for the last couple of seasons. Temple under Matt Rule and Jeff Collins both saw success with running backs, and they had success running the football. And like I said, controlling the game, kind of the pace of play. And they had guys that, made it to NFL camps or are in the NFL, and Jahad Thomas and Raquel Armstead, two really good running backs. And even before then, they had Bernard Pierce. So, they have a history of having very good running backs. And that just kind of hasn't been the case the last several seasons. As you mentioned, obviously they had a breakout game against Norfolk State this past weekend. True freshman Joquez Smith had a monster game on 15 carries, running for over 140 yards. So that was good to see. That was something you expected against an FCS opponent, that hopefully the game could get going and maybe you could start to find some of these holes. The offensive line could start to open some of these holes and establish some continuity there and consistency. So I think this will be a true measuring stick of where this team actually is when you play a Power 5 team like Miami, especially one that has bigger bodies up front, what this offensive line can do and how that run game can develop.
And certainly a big benefit to the run game, getting that thing going would maybe if the passing game can get going. With EJ there back again after last season, EJ Warner, the son of Kurt Warner, goes for 3,000 yards last year. Just have there been, again, I know it's 3 games, and I know that Rutgers game might stand out to you, and we're going to get more into that one, but is there differences or maybe some changes, either improvements or some things that you've already seen different with EJ, maybe in his development so far?
Yeah, I think right now what we've seen is EJ is seeming to feel a little bit more comfortable moving a little bit back in the pocket. He's kind of showing that he can roll out of the pocket a little bit more. He's willing to run the ball a little bit more, and that was something we did not see him do last year. But I think where we have seen a little bit of a regression, and I use that word loosely because, he's had outstanding numbers last year. Is he just doesn't seem comfortable back in the pocket this year. And I don't know if that's just because of a really young offensive line. He's taken some hits already this year, even though he's only been sacked once. I'm not really sure what that's going on, but he just doesn't seem as comfortable, and he's kind of seeming to try to do a little too much. So I don't know if it's maybe a pressure thing. But as you mentioned, the Rutgers game stood out. And again, he didn't get hit too much in that game, but when he did get hit, it looked painful. And late in the game, he threw two really costly interceptions that really put that game on ice for the Scarlet Knights. So, but what he does continue to do well is deliver the ball quickly. And I've seen guys on your site write about how quick EJ gets the ball out of his hands. And, that's one of his best attributes is he knows where to deliver the ball and he gets it there quickly. And he has very good accuracy in that regard where he can deliver the ball in some tight windows and he can make some throws, that like an NFL quarterback would make. And obviously he has his dad to obviously help thank him for that, with him coaching him his whole life. But that's kind of where I see EJ, he just doesn't seem as comfortable as what he was, but you never know what's going to happen on come game day. And we'll see, I guess, how he responds in a big game atmosphere on Saturday.
I know you touched on a little bit of the running game, a little bit weapons there, but maybe offensively, sticking with that, with kind of some offensive weapons that he has at his disposal, maybe what you're expecting from these guys at receiver, tight end, and then maybe what they've shown so far this year, and maybe, something to kind of watch for in this one in particular.
Yeah, so I already mentioned Joquez Smith, who, like I said, is a true freshman out of Tampa, Jesuit high school, ran for over 5,000 yards down there in his high school career. Only arrived at Temple over the summer, so he didn't even have the preseason to kind of get acclimated to the college game. The run game had been stagnant for the most part of the first game and a half, game and three quarters. But Drayton put Joquez in and he started, finding some holes in that Rutgers game. And I think once you saw that, it's like, okay, this guy's a really small dude. He can maybe find some of these holes that are a little smaller than what you would typically have for a college or Division I level running back. But he kind of just seems to find them, and he has some moves that he can put on some guys, and he made guys miss. And I think we saw that against Norfolk State. So he's definitely going to be a guy to watch out for on Saturday, and hopefully is the future of Temple's running back room. As far as receivers go, Dante Wright, transfer out of Colorado State, has been proven to be the most consistent commodity that EJ has at his disposal. He just seems very comfortable in receiving the ball. And I know that sounds obvious as a wide receiver, but, he just seems to feel very comfortable getting the ball thrown to him. When he does catch the ball, he's very secure with it. He doesn't try to do too much. He just makes a catch and goes down, and, he'll make plays. Ahmad Anderson's another guy who's kind of a speedster out of the slot who has shown over his time at Temple that he can be a big play guy. He has had some ball security issues in the past, so that's something to watch out for, obviously, with Miami's secondary. And then Temple has a really good pair of tight ends in David Martin Robinson and Jordan Smith, who, especially towards the end of last season, really came on and EJ kind of started connecting with. And both of them went over for multiple 100-yard games or 100-yard seasons last year toward the end of last season. And Smith hasn't been, I guess, as productive as we would have expected this early in the season, but DMR is still a very, very reliable target, and EJ will try to find him. He's a single-digit guy, and like I said, that single-digit mentality at Temple represents those tough players, and those are the guys that kind of lead the team. So, the single-digit to single-digit connection will be there.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear how Temple's kind of navigating that single-digit stuff each year. Because as you mentioned, it means so much to that program. Miami's 3-0. They've won all three of their home games to start it out. This is their first road game, so we'll see how they perform there. Also, too, I think this is a little bit maybe understated. Miami's has a bye week coming up afterwards, so Miami's got to put together a performance, before essentially wrapping up September, wrapping up the non-conference schedule, maybe not, obviously not looking ahead to the bowl week. I know oftentimes we talk about looking ahead to the next opponent, but I think even looking ahead to bye week is actually in play. And I think obviously with what happened last year, Miami going to the bye week lost to Middle Tennessee. So everything's on the table. I think Miami certainly has to play well, and then they get going with conference play, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and so on. So Miami's looking to do well. It's interesting with these programs, Ryan, they've played so much when they were in the Big East together. The ties with the head coaches, going back to Al Golden, Manny Diaz, briefly, that interesting scenario. Temple's got a couple of Miami guys on the team with former walk-on kicker Camden Price, and then defensive tackle Alan Hay over there as well, getting a lot of snaps. Just how are those guys doing? I know Miami fans will be curious to hear how they're doing, and seeing some familiar faces over there.
Yeah, Camden has come in, at the preseason camp last year, and he made an immediate impact, taking over kickoff responsibilities from Rory Bell, who has since transferred to Cincinnati. Camden just showed consistency. He only missed one field goal all of last year for the Owls, and that was something where Temple really had been struggling the last couple of years to find a consistent kicker that had a little bit of range to them and could go beyond 40 yards. And Camden has provided that. And even though he's only 2 of 4 right now on the year, or 3 of 5, I believe, on the year, he still has looked good in terms of how he's kicking, how he's getting contact in his release with the ball and all that. And Drayton, has full confidence in him as the full-time place kicker. And Alan Hay, he's had to play some meaningful snaps right away for Temple because Temple's pretty banged up along the defensive line right now. So he really, the Norfolk State game really showed how much he actually was needed and how much he will be relied on, especially this week. With Jerquavion Mahone was actually out for Temple, who's their other starting nose tackle. And, Hay was in there. He looked really good against Norfolk State. And then when the backups were in, or the other players that they had to rotate in there, several of which were walk-ons, you could just see the difference in that defensive line, how they were getting pushed around a little bit by Norfolk State. So hopefully Mahone will be back. All indications point that he should be back for this game against Miami. But, like I said, Alan Hay, he's been, relied upon. People really like him with the Temple. He's a strong dude. They really like how he, clogs up the middle, and he's that like true nose tackle that Temple really loves to have in the middle of that 3-4 defense.
Let's stay with the defense. Some of the metrics look good. Pro Football Focus grading them out well. Second highest in the conference defensively. Pass defense. Kind of get your take there. Third, on coverage grade. I mean, there are some metrics there that look good so far. But what's your overall takeaways on the defense? Again, with the Norfolk State, just like Miami. I mean, they're just coming off a game against Bethune-Cookman. But what's your take on the defense and some things that you just talked about, but also overall as a defense?
Yeah, I think the biggest area that, and I'll take the results with a grain of salt because Temple has played two very weak opponents in Akron and Norfolk State, and then Rutgers is also one of the weaker Power 5 teams. But what I've seen from the defense is that there hasn't been a whole lot of drop off from the switch at defensive coordinator from last season. And Temple started out really good defensively last season. Despite its record, DJ Elliott had that defense looking really good, firing on all cylinders. And that's really what caused Temple to get off to such a poor start last year was the offense. It wasn't really the defense. And then towards the end of last season, you'd see that the scores kind of started racking up. And I think the defense just kind of got gassed and the depth kind of got tested there. And, with Everett Withers coming in from Florida Atlantic and who was on Temple staff last year and then briefly left to Florida Atlantic to take their pass game coordinator position and then returned. I think what you've seen is continuity in the system and guys just feeling a little more comfortable in a system that they hadn't played in before. And that carrying over of the defensive scheme itself has really helped the team. And I think that's kind of how you can attest that to the start of the season. Now, that's not to say Temple has some very good players on defense as well. The linebacker group particularly is especially strong. They have 3 guys in the linebacker room that have NFL potential, in Jordan McGee, Avandi Rigby, and Leighton Jordan. And so far, Florida transfer Dwan Black has really looked like a stud. He leads the team currently in tackles for loss. He's probably the best athlete Temple has on their team. He's just so fast and long off the edge, and he can get to a quarterback in a hurry. So that's something Miami's going to really have to account for come Saturday is just Temple's linebacker presence. And then the corners are also very good. The secondary itself is pretty good. They're proven guys, they're veteran guys. Jalen McMurray, there's a reason he was named a single digit as a redshirt freshman, and that doesn't happen at all Temple very often. Just a real solid cover guy, can kind of play really anywhere. They kind of even moved him into the nickel last week. I think just to give him a little bit more experience and if they need him there, they could probably play him there. And then Taiwan Francis, another transfer from Colorado State, has really come in and solidified the safety position, which kind of had been a little shaky at times the past couple of years at Temple. But, he's just a big hitter. He's, a true hard hitting old school safety who kind of just plays all over the field. And he's another guy you have to account for at all times.
Going back to that Rutgers game, I want to get your take. I'm sure you broke it down plenty there on Al's Daily and talked about enough. But look, it was 36-7 final score there, but only down 13-7 in the fourth. Looking at the turnovers, the rush defense obviously stand out to me, kind of looking at there. But your takeaways on that, essentially how it got away from them, the way it was maybe looking the first three quarters as Temple gets back into it there in the fourth. Just your overall thoughts on that one, essentially what went wrong and maybe how the players and coaches have kind of talked about it since.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, what I saw was the team really struggled offensively. And I don't know what to attribute that to necessarily, because aside from the run game, they were moving the ball okay. EJ looked okay in the first quarter. It wasn't his best game that he's ever played, but he didn't look shaky until that second half, really. But as you mentioned, it was 13-7 with about 9.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter before Rutgers kind of put that dagger score on the board. But I think what ultimately happened there was there were a couple bad calls in the game made by officials that kind of, I think, killed a little bit of Temple's momentum. Rutgers got the ball back and then just started doing what they do, and they are very good at it. They're just run the ball down your throat, kill the clock, control the clock, and gash your defense. And I think that's ultimately what happened, and that's what caused the defense to give up those late scores. Is I think they were just gassed at that point from being on the field so much, the offense not being able to establish many drives of more than a couple plays here and there. And I think ultimately that's what kind of let the wheels fall off for that game. You mentioned the two turnovers, one of which was not EJ's fault. It was a tip ball interception that the receiver should have had. But that obviously set Rutgers up in great field position. And then the next drive, it was EJ just trying to do a little too much, I think, play a little hero ball. So I think the team used that, though, as a learning experience, because they were expecting to be competitive in that game. And for the most part of the better part of three quarters, they were. I think they know that they let that one slip away, because last year it was a 16-14 game against Rutgers. And honestly, they probably should have beat Rutgers last year. This year, I think they know that was a little bit of a wake-up call, that we still have some work to do. We still have some growth that we need to do. We still have some depth issues that we need to address, but it's, next man up now. We have to really focus in on, hone in on what we want to do and what we want to achieve. And that's kind of what Drayton said in his post game is, we're not great yet. We need to get there, but that means we need to focus on us and do what we need to do in order to win and not beat ourselves.
Miami defensive coordinator Lance Guidry said something interesting in the press conference this week about essentially performances. When things, wasn't speaking anything specifically, but just said, when things don't go well, essentially it's going to come back again. Later on down the season, teams are going to see what you put on film. And that's a perfect point. I'm sure Miami is obviously dissecting that game and trying to replicate some of the things that worked for Rutgers in that one. And obviously Temple will have to be ready for that, and vice versa. Things that haven't gone well for Miami, certainly teams will be trying to pick those apart. So fascinating game. These teams back again. Remember covering them, these teams before. Looking forward to seeing these teams at it again. But Ryan, thanks. Great insight. Appreciate you, man.
I appreciate having me on. Thanks for having me.